Hello again everybody, welcome back to Inspirational Landscapes. I'm Peter Knight and I'm just following up on a discussion that we had in one of our recent live sessions. We used John Ford's film The Searchers as an illustrative case study in that session. Now it's a controversial film for a number of reasons, and it did generate some negative comment from students ranging from, can we please use a case study that doesn't leave such a bad taste about the treatment of Native Americans, to these old films are cheesy cringe fests. Well, those are both perfectly good points of view. So why do we use The Searchers as an example at several points in this module, given that it's a cringy old, cheesy old film, and it does leave a bad taste regarding the treatment of the Native Americans in the film? Well, there are some very obvious reasons that I can trot out. It provides a really good illustration of some of the key themes or ideas from the module. So we're talking about space and place, home versus wilderness, the scales of human and natural landscapes. We're going to be talking about Turner's transition thesis as a way of thinking about landscape, cultural landscapes over time. And The Searchers does provide a really good illustration of some of those key points. We can also say that despite its very obvious flaws and its age, it's a really important film in the history of cinema. It consistently features in lists of the best films ever made, and it's cited as a key influence on subsequent filmmakers, people like Martin Scorsese, George Lucas and others. But there are some less obvious reasons that are possibly more compelling. I just want to run through some of those as well to explain what we're doing in the module. Now, this next reason kind of comes under the heading of something we mentioned right back in the first session when I gave you the quote from Rudyard Kipling, who said, "What should they know of England who only England know?" And we made the point that if you only know about one thing and you've got nothing to compare it with, then you can't really say very much at all about the thing that you do know about. I think I used the example of a pen or something, and I said, well, is this my big pen or is this my small pen? Well, you don't know unless you've seen the other one. If my other pen is then this is a small one. If my other pen is then this is the big one. So what can you know about this pen if this pen is the only one that you know? You need something to compare it with. And there's another expression that I like. You can't establish a revolution, or you can't understand the revolution, if you don't understand the status quo. Revolutions are revolting against something, we're reacting against something. If you don't know what that thing is that we're reacting against, well then you're not in a very strong position to lead that reaction, or to be part of that reaction, or to judge that reaction. You can't establish a revolution, you can't judge a revolution if you don't understand what the status quo was before the revolution. Now, history and geography, they're full of uncomfortable, inappropriate, distasteful moments, characters and ideas. But it's important that we acknowledge those characters, those ideas, and that we know about them. It's through ignorance that history repeats itself. Now, ancient history and the classics in any field, whether we're talking about cinema or whether we're talking about human history in general, but ancient history and the classics, they provide a context and a driver for modern history, for the present and for the future. What's happening now and what's going to happen in the future has partly been driven by things that have happened in the past. So, for example, this film, Maliglutit by Zacharias Kunut, it's a direct response to John Ford's film, but it approaches that same basic premise and scenario that Ford's film was based around from an indigenous perspective, from the Indians' point of view, if you want to think of it that way. If you're criticising John Ford's treatment of the Indians in his The Searchers, well then this whole film is from that indigenous perspective, and it makes the point kind of that stories about people in the landscape from an indigenous perspective don't have to put white settlers in the foreground. The traditional American Western is basically from the white settlers or the white colonizers, the white conquerors' point of view. Films such as Maliglutit make the point that you don't have to do that if you're making a film from an indigenous perspective. The KLE resources will give you a chance to explore more about this film and the director and other indigenous filmmakers. But I guess the key point I'm making here is that to see the present and the future direction of cinema, of landscape, one of the themes that we're looking at in this module, and to understand the motivations of present-day filmmakers, you do need to be aware of and to have seen the flaws in previous cinema, which is what they're reacting to. Like I say, you won't understand the revolution if you didn't know what the status quo was. And that is one of the reasons that we've looked at John Ford's The Searchers in this module. Now, another reason is that you won't see what the new and the old have in common if all you know about is the new. In modern cinema, whether we're talking about the indigenous new wave or any kind of cinema, there are echoes and restatements of values and viewpoints from earlier cinema, either as harmony, chiming in with what people have done and how people have thought previously, or as a counterpoint contradicting what people have said previously. So in the resources that I'm putting on the KLE, where you can read a little bit more and watch a few more video interviews with filmmakers about The Searchers and the modern version of it, you'll hear someone saying that Kunut uses classic Western iconography, so the images in his film are similar to images and ideas in some of the older films, but from an indigenous point of view. So we're going to have a whole session about Westerns later on, and some of the things that we'll be talking about are going to be focusing very much on the land, the scale of human actors within the natural landscape, and that's something you can see there from Kunut's film. Small actors, small characters in this vast landscape. Ideas of land use, ideas of conflict and revenge, universal stories, if you like, happening against an eternal landscape. As it says there, the land is eternal, these disputes are not. And that contrast between the human scale and the natural scale, that's something that occurs both in indigenous cinema and in the traditional Hollywood westerns that we'll be looking at later. So I say there are echoes and restatements, there are harmonies and there are counterpoints between the modern and the ancient, the historical cinema. To recognise those in the modern cinema and to understand those, to understand the language that modern cinema, modern filmmakers are using, you need to have seen, or you need to know about, those old films as well, because that's where the language comes from, or that's where the language is derived from. So you need to know something about the history in order to understand something about the present, however distasteful parts of that history might be. So that's the other reason why we look at John Ford's The Searchers in this module. It's so that we don't just know the comfortable things, and we don't just know the present day.